With the release of Cyberpunk 2077 finally approaching after over a decade in development, fans are waiting with bated breath for any information on the game and how it will play. With the release date constantly getting closer with every day, the grueling secrecy that CD Projekt Red previously maintained about the game is being lifted gradually, and we now have a general sense of the game's atmosphere and setting. As is the nature of the cyberpunk genre, the game's world has inherent political undertones, depicting giant megacorporations having their hands in every major world power to create a futuristic capitalist dystopia. As the discourse around the game continues, however, many fans have expressed their concerns with the game's seemingly obvious political themes, to which the quest designer Paweł Sasko responded in an interview. For me, the most important thing is that our game is not a political statement, a political thesis. For me and my team, Cyberpunk 2077 is a work of art. This quote was used pretty widely across journalistic sources to imply that the political themes inherent to the cyberpunk genre were missing from the game entirely. This is not the case. Cyberpunk is an inherently political genre, and it's an inherently political franchise, says CD Projekt Red quest designer Patrick Mills. Clearly, the public misunderstood the studio's original statement. Sasko was not telling anyone that the game lacks political themes, but rather that the political undertones are not directly influenced by current events, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement. In general, the game is simply meant to reflect a possible future for the world if unchecked capitalism and scientific development begin to merge as they seem to be now. This controversy surrounding the Polish studio reflects a larger discussion that gamers seem to be having more and more lately. The newest installment in the Call of Duty franchise was recently announced, and the trailers showed some pretty heavy political themes, some even describing it as propaganda. Nonetheless, the reveal reinvigorated discussions of politics in video games and whether or not it should be accepted. This topic is the source of much animosity among gaming communities, as many people seem to believe that political themes should not exist in video games. The issue with this statement is that there are plenty of video game franchises that do have these kinds of themes, many of them taking the center stage in the game's story. Series like Fallout and Metal Gear Solid have extremely apparent political undertones, and many people adore these series for their story and universe. So what's the difference? Why do these series get a pass while newer projects like Cyberpunk and Call of Duty get major backlash for their seemingly ham-fisted political tones?
Has changed. It's no longer about nations, ideologies, or ethnicity. It's an endless series of proxy battles fought by mercenaries and machines. War and its consumption of life has become a well-oiled machine.
The issue probably lies in the fact that the themes in these games are typically more critical of a general concept of politics, such as war or injustice, rather than a direct commentary on a specific nation's policies. For instance, Fallout and Metal Gear Solid are notorious for their anti-war themes and commentary about the effects of the Cold War. The difference, though, is that both series stray away from taking a side. In fact, in some ways, both games are somewhat in favor of the capitalist republic. Fallout tells the story of a post-war nation exclusively from American perspectives, and Metal Gear Solid depicts the heroic escapades of an American intelligence organization. It's also possible that CD Projekt Red is absolutely making statements with their world building, and are simply hiding it under a guise of science fiction and social commentary. A famous example of a game taking a blatant stance on political topics, even one directly critical of American foreign policy, is the game Spec Ops: The Line, which puts the players in the shoes of a U.S. soldier who comes to terms with the fact that war is inherently immoral and affects the lives of everyone involved, even non-combatants. This is a pretty blatant way to criticize the actions of the American elite, and while it is a stance most people would agree with, it's not exactly subtle in its presentation. With its heavy-handed take on foreign affairs, it wouldn't be hard to believe if the game bombed and didn't do well with fans. However, this is not the case. The game boasts a 9 out of 10 on Steam, with many fans citing its riveting and emotional story, with twists and turns and a hard-to-swallow ending. This is a pretty direct critique of a political issue, and one that would be expected to elicit outrage from the same group who criticizes Cyberpunk. However, the overwhelming majority of players praise the game for its themes. What makes it any different? Well, the answer lies in its setting. Spec Ops: The Line, much like Metal Gear, is set in a foreign country and seeks to comment on the nature of war and military combat rather than on American civil activism, which proves to be an important distinction. Nowadays, the popular political monologues tend to be critical of the status quo, and while this isn't a new development in many art forms, the world of video games is not used to such direct political adversity. While Cyberpunk does not directly reflect American politics in its setting, its themes seem to parallel the philosophies that are becoming popular in the increasingly divided American political system. This is not to say that CD Projekt Red is taking a side on American issues, but the increasing animosity from certain interest groups towards leftist ideals like LGBT representation, socialist concepts, finances, have put any sort of political thought under the scrutinizing microscope of the public. Another major argument in the world of game design is the idea that video games are an inherently artistic form of entertainment. Bearing many similarities to film and visual arts, there is a big movement to accept game design as an official form of art. If this is to be the case, then it is important to judge games on the same merits as other art forms, like film and literature. Even paintings can have underlying commentaries on the state of the world, and the artist's personal view of how things are at the time. A novel, like Orwell's 1984, which in all fairness was met with much criticism upon its publication, is now celebrated as a masterpiece of literature, which made very insightful observations on the circumstances in which it was written. One of the most iconic examples of cyberpunk in art is 1982's Blade Runner. The film depicts an American capitalist society as an overruling force in a world where the line between humanity and technology is blurred. It contains themes of abuse, segregation, and racism. The cinematic expertise exhibited in the film, along with the immensely moving performance from Harrison Ford, solidifies it as a masterpiece in cinematic history. Despite being almost directly critical of American capitalist trends in a pretty blatant way, nobody seems to question the validity of its place in the artistic world. It's fair to say that even Orwell's novel had a ton of controversy when it came out, somewhat ironically being lambasted for its seemingly radical depiction of government. Art, in general, often serves the purpose of sparking discourse, and if games are meant to be held on the same level as classic films and novels, they will realistically be met with the same level of controversy. Quest designer Paweł Sasko said in the same interview, "For me and my team, Cyberpunk 2077 is a work of art, and I always stick to it. I always say it to my designers. I don't feel like I'm producing something. I feel more like I'm painting a picture or making music, stories, or movies." In short, the controversy surrounding games that have political themes is not a surprise, and in some ways may be intentional by a developer that treats the medium like an artistic canvas. Healthy discussion about political topics in art and culture is important to maintaining an educated populace and a sense of patronage for artists, but it isn't fair to claim that a specific medium is artistic in nature and then deny it the basic fundamentals of criticism. Cyberpunk 2077 is being developed by Polish studio CD Projekt Red and is set to release on November 19, 2020. The game has been in development for over a decade already, and it would hardly suffice to say that it has been quite an expectation to live up to. Provided that the role-playing elements are as deep as the developers have promised, the game is sure to do well with critics and fans alike, regardless of any negative emotions the marketing may have produced.